What happened to Yvonne when she left that day?
She was confronted by someone who shot her 3 times at the bottom of the stairs.
It was a shock. Everybody at least either knew Yvonne, knew of Yvonne, or knew her family.
The shooter knew what they wanted to do, and they did it with cold-blooded efficiency. I wasn't convinced that it was a winnable case. We didn't have a murder weapon. We didn't have any eyewitness accounts. We didn't have any admissions. We didn't have any DNA evidence.
Did people know who the killer was?
Everyone knew who did it, and the fact that something like this would happen in small town St. Croix Falls in 1985 was just incomprehensible.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Dell. Today's Crime Exposé takes us to St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. A mother of 4 was killed in a cowardly attack as she left her home. The identity of the killer was an open secret in the town for decades, but prosecutors were determined to hold a killer accountable and get justice for the family. St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. It's less than an hour away from Minneapolis, but feels a world away. 45-year-old Yvonne Menke was leaving for work one morning, as she always did.
Yvonne Menke walked down the steps of her apartment. On the way down those stairs, she was confronted by someone who shot her.
That individual shot her 3 times, once through kind of the neck area, and then 2 more times from the back of the head as Yvonne laid on the ground on the cold cement sidewalk.
Yvonne's daughter, after hearing the noises, looked out the window on the back alleyway. She saw a subject that was walking and then eventually started to almost jog away from the scene. Her sister told her to call law enforcement, which ultimately she did.
It was cold, it was calculated. The shooter knew what they wanted to do, and they did it with cold-blooded efficiency. It was an up-close and personal execution-style murder.
First officer that arrived on scene noted that there was blood next to Yvonne's body. It was an obvious homicide.
There were no shell casings recovered. They also found boot prints in the snow at the bottom of the steps near the body, and then there were a line of prints that led north from the crime scene.
And then further out in the back alley, there were another set of same footprints that they were able to cast the different footprints that they found.
The morning of the murder, investigators canvassed the neighborhood, tried to find any witnesses. A witness came forward who had delivered papers that morning and had seen somebody at the top of the stairs about 20 minutes before the murder happened. Somebody in a big coat, possibly a man.
Yvonne Menke, a single mother, had been assassinated right outside of her home. The small town of St. Croix was stunned by this brazen murder.
It was a shock. Everybody either knew Yvonne, knew of Yvonne, or knew her family. And the fact that something like this would happen in small town St. Croix Falls is just incomprehensible.
The way police investigate a crime of this type, they concentrate on the people closest to the victim, family, friends, that type of thing. A lot of times, if the person has a significant other, in this case, Yvonne was dating a man named Jack Owen.
Jack Owen was known to be fairly charismatic when it came to women. So when law enforcement started to find out that Jack, in this case, was seeing 2 women at the same time, it wasn't much of a surprise to people in the community.
Mary Jo Lunsman was also dating Jack Owen at the time. So the 3 of them in this essentially a love triangle.
It didn't take police long to learn that the third person in the love triangle was Mary Jo Lunsman. They needed to speak to her and find out what she knew.
They went to her place of employment, which was a bank, and their impression of her was that she had this look on her face like, oh God, I've been caught.
So what did Mary Jo say to investigators?
They confront her on the Menke killing, and she starts to cry. She becomes emotional, which officers at the time thought was pretty unusual, given the fact they hadn't told her why they were there at that point.
Of course, they asked her if she had a gun. She had a couple. She had a rifle. She had a pistol. And that's not unusual in this part of the state.
There was some discussion about a gun that she had at one point that she actually gave to a friend to have that person sell.
It absolutely sounds fishy, and it seems strange that she would have loaned this .22 pistol to a friend just before the homicide happened.
As to where she was at the time of the killing, was at her house alone. She didn't have an alibi when you break it down.
Police would continue their investigation into the love triangle that involved Yvonne Menke, but there were other angles that needed to be considered. Yvonne's autopsy would hopefully fill in some blanks on how she was so brutally murdered.
The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was 3 gunshot wounds. A small caliber gun was the weapon that was used. They recovered all 3 bullets and determined them to be .22 caliber.
Investigators interviewed Yvonne Menke's children, including Julie, traumatized over her mother's murder a few feet from their front door. What did Yvonne's daughter say that was of value?
A day or 2 prior to the murder, she had received a phone call. The person on the other end of the phone wanted to know if Yvonne was there. She had already left for work. Yvonne's daughter gave her some descriptions as far as what her daily schedule was, and that was that.
Julie thought that the phone call was somewhat odd because she could hear noises which suggested to her that the call was being made from a payphone. Of course, Julie didn't know at the time that the person was most likely the killer, and that Julie was providing Yvonne's work habits when she was leaving for work.
Police now were convinced that Yvonne knew her killer and that the killer knew her, but there was a long journey ahead to hold the killer accountable.
Everyone knew who did it, and the fact that she wasn't in jail made some people upset.
Deputies in Polk County, Wisconsin had a classic whodunit on their hands. But this wasn't some fictional crime novel. A woman had been murdered. At this point in the investigation, everyone and anyone was a suspect.
At that point in the investigation, the investigators didn't really know that the love triangle was that significant. At the time, they were just trying to chase down leads, eliminate suspects, so to speak. Yvonne had an ex-husband, and of course, investigators looked towards him. He was cleared of any type of suspicion, though, in pretty short order.
Police revisited their prime suspect, Mary Jo Landsman.
After the interview at the bank, they brought her back to her home to question her further. By this time, they knew that they were looking for some boots that might have matched the boot prints that were found at the scene, and they asked her if she had any.
She then accessed a pair of size 5 Arctic Cat boots from a small cubby area near the basement stairs and turned those over to law enforcement. And immediately after leaving the scene, the investigators noted that the tread pattern was very consistent with the boot prints that were found at the scene, and also the size was very consistent.
During their first interview, Mary Jo claimed she didn't know Yvonne Menke. This time, Mary Jo's memory seemed to improve.
Mary Jo, she did acknowledge approximately 2 years prior to the homicide, she called Yvonne Menke and they had a phone conversation to talk about their situation with Jack Owen. Outside of that, though, Mary Jo denied having any contact with Yvonne and denied ever meeting Yvonne personally or face-to-face.
Law enforcement had pretty well focused on Mary Jo Landsman at this point. When they looked at the opportunity, the primary individual that appeared to have motive and opportunity for this was Mary Jo Landsman.
Police then visited Yvonne Menke's former paramour, Jack Owen. If he were carrying a torch for either Yvonne or Mary Jo, it didn't show. How about in their subsequent interviews? Were they able to learn anything from Jack then?
Jack Owen did begin seeing and eventually married another lady. And during that phase of their relationship, several personal images of her and Jack and other personal documents had been defaced and destroyed.
Somebody had broken into their house when they were gone. At that time, nothing was stolen from the house. It was just these pictures that were destroyed. I think to investigators, it sort of hinted at somebody who was jealous.
It had to be Mary Jo. Why else would anybody break into someone's home and target those images of her and Jack? The only person that would have cared about those images was Mary Jo.
Although cops now suspected that Mary Jo Landsman was the killer, they needed more. Prosecutors would only have one chance to present their case if it went to trial.
Investigators continued working on this for several years. And quite honestly, as the years went on, the case had grown fairly cold. The district attorney at that time had held a John Doe hearing to try to get enough testimony to bring charges, but felt that he was not able to at that time.
Everyone knew who did it, and the fact that she wasn't in jail, I think, made some people upset. Law enforcement certainly never forgot about the case. It was just a case that, in terms of information that was coming in, and the leads that were coming in started to dry up, and for that reason, the investigation started to slow down because there wasn't much to go on.
The years didn't heal the pain for Yvonne's family, who knew their mom's killer walked the streets free as a bird. In 2020, the case attracted a new set of eyes.
I began looking at the case with Mark Biller, who was a former prosecutor and defense attorney. We wanted to look at this case from the very beginning with an unbiased lens, without the bias idea that Mary Jo was the one who was responsible.
The case had sat cold for 38 years, and the evidence pointed to Mary Jo. And the only person that had motive and opportunity was Mary Jo. And the case wasn't going to get stronger.
Time would prove to be the downfall of a killer who had eluded justice for so long.
Mary Jo, she asked her friend, Linda, have any investigators been there to talk to you? Linda answered, no, they haven't. Well, if they do, just tell them that you don't remember anything. Best to stay out of it.
The murder of Yvonne Menke went unsolved and continued to be an open wound and a source of pain to Yvonne's family. But cold case investigators in Polk County hadn't forgotten.
The case was first brought to my attention by investigator Andrew Vitalis. At first, I wasn't convinced that it was a winnable case, quite honestly. We didn't have a murder weapon. We didn't have any eyewitness accounts. We didn't have any admissions. We didn't have any DNA evidence. But being presented with all these 1,000 little pieces of evidence, it formed a picture that was fairly convincing.
We first approached Mary Jo as a witness, and we wanted to hear her story. Her last name was now Bailey, and she was living in Arizona. She had what I would describe as selective memory when it came to certain things that I thought were really important to the case, and she would most likely still remember.
When investigator Vitalis went down to Arizona to speak with Mary Jo, he also had a search warrant to get a swab of her DNA. She was brought to the Maricopa County Police Station. While she was in there, she made several phone calls. One of those phone calls was to her friend, Linda.
And she asked her if law enforcement had talked to her yet. And when Linda said no, she hasn't heard from anyone, she told Linda to just pretend that she didn't know anything so that she, quote, wouldn't have to get involved.
So the boots were sent back to the crime lab along with the casts, and they were examined using the most up-to-date technology that the crime lab had. We were happy that they were consistent with the findings that the lab made back in 1986, but we still needed more.
One of the problems that we had was that Jack Owen part of that love triangle had passed away in 2021, which is about the time that Andrew had just started working on this cold case, and so he was not able to interview him. The one thing that we did have was his testimony at the John Doe hearing from 1987. His testimony in that, I think, helped this case.
By no means was a slam dunk. We didn't have the smoking gun, if you will. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence, and it took a lot of trust by both DA Kemp and ADA Webster to do this, and also backing by the Menke family. And when they ultimately decided that they felt they had enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in court, that was a pretty special moment for the case.
So at that point, you made an arrest. What was Mary Jo's reaction?
I traveled to Arizona, and Mary Jo was taken into custody, and she didn't show any emotion. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't ask what it was about. She didn't exhibit any anger or frustration or fear. She was just as cool as can be, and I thought that summed her up as a person better than any words I could ever state or describe.
From what I can tell of Mary Jo, she set this aside and lived the life, probably not the life that she wanted ultimately, but moved forward without ever, it would seem she never even told anyone what she did. It would appear that she compartmentalized and had no remorse for what she did.
For 38 years, no one had been held accountable for the murder of Yvonne Menke. Now finally, Mary Jo would face a jury for what she did to the mother of four.
Yvonne's family, quite honestly, were wonderful throughout this whole process. They were finally getting closure. Everybody knew who the killer was. They had been carrying this burden for 38 years. They were finally being able to be heard, and they were just very grateful.
The trial of Mary Jo drew as much attention as the murder of Yvonne Menke. It turned out that Mary Jo wasn't as untouchable as some thought.
When a verdict comes back that quickly on a case of that magnitude, of course, you're thinking the worst.
The trial of Mary Jo Bailey for the murder of Yvonne Menke lasted 8 days. Mary Jo sat stone-faced through the proceedings, and the verdict was no surprise to anyone. Mary Jo was found guilty of killing Yvonne Menke, and at the age of 85, she was sentenced to life in prison. During the sentencing, Yvonne's family finally got to tell Mary Jo what her actions had done to their family. And a daughter, who innocently gave information to the killer, got to see Mary Jo held accountable. And now, it's time for today's Safety Spotlight. Mary Jo Bailey's obsession with her ex, Jack Owen, drove her to murder her perceived romantic rival, Yvonne Menke. Police say this horrific case emphasizes just how critical it is that you stay alert and practice situational awareness when dealing with someone who is unstable. If something feels off or makes you uneasy, trust your instincts and take action to ensure your safety. Your intuition can be an important tool in identifying potential risks. Carry pepper spray or taser if you feel it is necessary for your protection. Make sure you are trained in how to use them effectively. Avoid sharing detailed personal information or your schedule publicly, especially on social media, and limit the information you disclose to prevent it from being used against you. I'm Nancy O'Dell. For all of us here at Crime Exposé, please join us next time and stay safe.